Throwing journalists in prison is a dramatic and drastic measure taken by the most repressive, most retrograde countries around the world. Anti-state charges are on the rise. That's the favored strategy, including accusing journalists of engaging in terrorism or support for terrorism. Some countries are particularly brutal. Iran is a country where journalists have been subjected to brutal interrogation and torture. Syria, there's been widespread abuse of journalists in prison there. In China, for example, you hear about isolation and you hear about deprivation in terms of access to family.
Currently, Ethiopia is the second worst jailer of journalists in Africa. There's been a crackdown on the press in the wake of the Arab Spring. A few journalists have been thrown in jail as many times as Eskinder Nega. He has been in prison 9 times in Ethiopia. His newspapers have been shut down. His wife, herself a newspaper publisher, has been imprisoned. His son was born in prison. All this time, Eskinder had the choice to flee into exile and abandon journalism, but he has refused to do so.
I went and visited Eskinder in prison when he was first arrested back in 2006, along with his wife, Circulem Fasil, who was also pregnant at the time. We walked along this dirt path, and Eskinder was on the way back to where they were holding him, and they met. And just for a brief moment, he was able to put his hand on her stomach and caress her and obviously the child growing inside of her. As much as it was a sad moment, it was also an empowering moment, empowering for those of us who are determined to fight the good fight to ensure that freedom of speech lives in reality in places like Ethiopia.
Definitely in Ethiopia, we've seen a lot of international attention focused on the 2 Swedish journalists who were imprisoned, and I think the government recognized pretty quickly that while in the moment of that they were detained and imprisoned, it may have seemed like an expedient strategy, they paid an enormous political cost in terms of their international image for these policies.
Me and Martin went to Ogaden to try to find out what kind of impact the oil industry has to the conflict and what kind of impact the presence have for the civil populations that lives in the area.
We were ambushed by about 150 Ethiopian army soldiers, and we get hit quite quickly. I get hit in the shoulder and Johan gets shot in his arm. But we shout, media, media, international press, and raise our hands above our heads, and they arrest us. They keep us in the desert for 4 days and don't give us medical cares and arrange some kind of mockumentary. It's not some, crazy gun-ho militia who does this. It's a vice president who is the director.
Generally, international journalists will receive better treatment than local journalists because they enjoy this international support.
The worst in the prison, it's not the rats or the fleas or, to see people get beaten or the violence. The worst feeling is really to lose your freedom of expression. And there is one fellow prisoner who comes up to me and whispers in my ear like, Martin, please tell the world what's going on here in Kalite. Tell the world what you have seen. And that is a promise that we intend to keep.
From Cuba to Turkey, even countries that you wouldn't expect to be susceptible to international pressure like Iran and Syria, we've seen that raising your voice, speaking out, advocating, challenging the government, confronting the government about the policy of imprisoning journalists really makes a difference. And in case after case, we've seen journalists released as a result of this kind of international pressure.